The snows were late, but when they came they made up for it with a violent, howling vengeance that almost stopped the work at the load. The staircase was not working. Johnny had helped all that he could, flying an overheating platform to drive the pins hanging from safety wires over the yawning chasm, encouraging the others as well. They had almost made it, had even taken out another £90 in gold, when the first real storm of winter hit them. Under winds of near hurricane force, driving frozen pellets as hard as bullets, almost shaking the very mountains themselves, the staircase had collapsed. Fortunately, it had just been abandoned during a shift change, when it went, and there was no casualties. They were waiting now for a lull in the storm to see what else they could do. It was mandatory that they appear industrious, for it was the opinion of Robert the Fox that Turl would not act violently unless it appears there was no hope. But now, just now, the driving snow maxed any pictures the recon drone might take in its daily overfly. Besides, it was not vital. They all assured him that Johnny'd be there. Long ago, the planning had provided that 3 who looked like him keep up the appearance that he was always there. One of these 3 was always visible to the recon drone, each one to his own watch. It had even been 4 who had held up the sign, not Johnny. 3 watches were vital, for no crew could stand it for more than 2 hours in this bitter winter cold. So Johnny was not there today. Through the driving storm, he and 3 others were heading for a place once called Uravan. The historian, Dr. McDermott, developing quite a knack for picking up information, he picked some more from the tattered remains of the books. He even had a young Scot, an accomplished scout, assigned to him now just to go off and dig up ancient maps and books. And McDermott had found a reference that said that Uravan had one of the world's largest uranium deposits. It was supposed to be west and slightly south of the base, maybe 220 miles, just beyond and a little bit southwest of an enormous distinctive plateau. Uranium. So Johnny and one of the pilots, Angus and McCaffery, were on their way in a personnel plane. Who knew? They might be lucky. Angus and McCaffery was delighted. He was the one who had figured out all the man mechanics and got things working. Johnny had trained him and another half-dozen Scots in electronics, and they were all good at that and mechanics. It was Angus McCaffery who was the star. Pugnacious, never knowing the meaning of defeat, a bundle of enthusiastic black-haired optimism, Angus was quite certain they would find mountains of uranium right there, all ready to shovel into a bag and cart off. Johnny didn't think so. In the first place, they had no protection from radiation as yet, so they were a long way from shoveling anything. But a uranium mine might have enough left around to test the breath gas. He wisely refrained from dampening Angus's enthusiasm. All they were out of, for a fact, a scout to this place just to test breath gas was all they needed. The storm made visibility very poor. The passenger craft buckled along, battered by the machine gunning of the occasional local storms. The plane had damn all in the way of instruments, and it was all contact flying. A time or two a peak would flash by a mite too close, but from way up high was a carpet of turbulent whiteness, and one might lose his bearings. Fortunately, the storm was blowing eastward, and its worst furies were past by the time they had gone more than 100 miles. They burst out of a cloud into clear weather. The panorama of the western Rockies spread out, glistening in the late morning sun, breathtaking in its beauty. Scotland may be the best land in the world, said the co-pilot, but 'tis never like this. I'm sorry for doing the Irish. Yeah. Johnny punched their speed up to about 500, and the whole wide vast world fled by. He spotted the plateau, estimated from the ancient schoolbook map he held where Uravan might be. Even in the snow they could make out where an ancient curving road had been. He spotted the southeast point where the road forked, and down to the treetop level, counting the white-coated remains of towns, brought them to the mounds and dumps that must once have been Uravan. he landed in front of some buildings, the plane crunching into fresh white snow. AnneMcCaffery was out of the door like a running book, his kilt flying behind him, flashing his testicles at everybody. He danced into one of the ruined buildings, one after another, and suddenly came speeding back, his penis disappearing right up into his belly because it was so cold. His voice thin and sharp hair, he said, "'Tis Uridan!" He held up some tattered scraps of paper and then tried to find his testicles. Johnny reached in back and helped them find them and got out a breathe gas cartridge and the equipment. He and Angus had worked half the night making a remote control that would turn the regulator on and off. All they had to do was find a hot radiation spot, back off, turn on the remote, and see whether or not they got a flash of exploding gas. Johnny also got out some shovels, climbing ropes and some lamps. Running all over the place like a hunting hound, Angus was tracking down likely spots. There were ore dumps, there had been fences, but these had long since rusted away. They tried repeatedly. They would scoop out an old dump, put the breathe gas cartridge down, back off, release some breathe gas, and see whether it flashed in a small explosion. After a dozen tries, Angus became convinced it must be a spent cartridge. He switched it on in front of his face and promptly turned blue with coughing. No, it wasn't a spent cartridge. They went down to the pits. They scrambled into drifts, long since unsafe. They used up 5 cartridges of breathe gas. No explosions. Johnny felt a bit disheartened. He let Angus and the pilot go on with experiments while he just wandered around the ruins. It was all so badly decayed, there was difficulty in recognizing what the buildings had been used for. How Angus had found paper simply added up to Angus. It must have been protected by some preservation or something. Then Johnny started to get suspicious. In all this area he'd only found one pitiful remnant that might have been a body. Merely teeth fillings and buttons lying in a certain pattern within a room. No remains of filing cabinets, no distinguishable remains of machinery, aside from some decayed hoists. But no bodies, save that one. He went back to the plane and sat down. This place had been mined out before the silo attack, and had been mined out with such care that the waste dumps weren't even hot. Point of reference, currently it's April 2024, and America, under Jewish orders, are currently trying to wipe out the Russians and the Chinese because they have no more oil, gas, or uranium in America. Angus came streaming back, shouting, "It works! It works!" He was carrying something that had been framed. Johnny got out and looked at it. One corner of the ancient frame was not charred. Inset into the dilapidated mounting was a piece of ore. It had a brass plate under it. Mostly undecipherable, there must have been a leaded glass faceplate in the frame at one time, for a scrap of it remained in the corner. He carried it over to a rock and sat down and studied it. The ore was brown and black. It had been mounted on an exhibit on a lead background. He held the inscription this way and that. He couldn't make out more than something saying the first something and then a person's name, and he couldn't read that either. He turned the plate in another way and then saw the letters on the top more plainly. They said, "Pitch blend." "Look," said Angus. "Let me show ya." He took the frame from Johnny and put it about 30 feet away. He pointed the breathe gas cartridge at it and then came back to Johnny. He flipped on the remote control switch. The breathe gas emission exploded. "I'll do it again," said Angus. He turned the switch full on and left it on. He wouldn't have had time to turn it back off anyway. The bottle, its emitting snout flaming like a rocket engine, took off and went about 10 feet. The pilot and Angus shouted with delight. "Pitch blende," said Johnny, who had done a lot of homework. "That's uranic ore. It's the source of a lot of radioactive isotopes." "Where'd you get it?" They dragged him off to the broken shambles of a building that was so collapsed they had had to dig and tug and pull a lot of the roof to get anything out of it. Covered with dust and hot from work despite the chill air, Johnny at last went and sat down on what had once been a porch. You got to bear in mind, this Johnny guy is surrounded by men in miniskirts and no underwear. A museum, a small museum it had been. Other specimens were there, rose quartz. hematite, things that weren't from this immediate place. But there wasn't even any evidence that the pitchblende had been from here. "The test for precast works," said the irrepressible Johnny. Angus, sorry? Blokes in miniskirts put me off. Johnny felt depressed. He knew it worked. He had seen a blaze scraper canopy just blow up and kill a silo long ago when some radioactive dust had hit it. "I'm glad it works, but even if there is any uranium left under us, it's too deep for us to get to. Collect some more lead and wrap this specimen up. We'll take it home." "Let's look around here some more," said Angus. Johnny, who had to wait out the storm from the east anyway, said, "Well, fuck it, go ahead." But he knew it was mined out. I knew one body and a museum. Where in heaven's name was he going to find uranium? Lots of it. Oh, where? Johnny gazed with horror into the deep canyon. There was a flying drill platform down there, close to the river, and it was in real trouble. It was the day after the return of the Yerevan. The storm had blown over, leaving a sparkling white-coated dry day. But at these altitudes it was bitterly cold, and the canyon, as ever, was funneling winds into torrents of turbulence. Two Scots, one of them Dunedin and the other a black-haired youth named Andrew, were down there on that platform trying to recover the staircase. It had fallen down 900 feet into the frozen river. 60 feet long and built of rods, it had pierced the river ice, leaving an end on the bank. They had grappled the end with a hook lowered from the flying drill platform and had tried to fly the staircase up and out of the river. It was caught under water. Now sprays coming up through the broken ice were cloaking the platform with water that instantly froze, increasing the platform's weight by the moment. He knew what they were trying to do. They were trying to look busy for the benefit of the recon drone that would soon, any moment or two, be flying overhead. The rest of the shift crew were strung out along the chasm's edge, untangling the masses and masses of cables and drums that had been scrambled by the storm. Dunedin and Andrew had got down there to look busy, trying to salvage the staircase. Johnny had been returning in a small passenger plane to work out some new method of getting to the gold. He didn't have a co-pilot. He had only the old Dr. McDermott, the historian, who had begged to ride along and come up to the load and write the saga of the storm. The ancient Scot, who had considered himself very expendable at the recruiting, was a very wise and very valued Dean of Literature. But he was not in the slightest bit trained in their work, and frail beyond estimation, with hardly the muscle and skill one needed to even have a wank. There was no time at all to drop down and pick up a trained and agile Scot from the site on the cliff. They were using local radios. All the items of equipment had them built in. For their range and the range of the mine intercoms was only about a mile. The transmissions were also masked by the mountains to the east. The radio down there on the platform was evidently open. "Throw off the ubex, Andrew," Dunedin was saying tensely. "The motor are overheating. They will disengage just as Andrew disengaged. Hook to the staircase. Either when it does, when it don't, sheep." The whine of the overloading mountains and motors were also coming through the open mics, screeching and squealing. Johnny knew that was happening. They couldn't fly the platform free. They couldn't drop down to the rolling, freezing water, and the platform was going to go up in flames at any moment. At least they'd be warm. Such a platform had rudimentary flying controls, usually covered by a lead glass canopy. But humans didn't use the canopies, and Dunedin was down there in a mist of flying spray that was coating not only himself but also the controls with instant ice. The recon drone would be by in another second or two. It must see efforts to mine, not disaster. Johnny could hear its nearing rumble outside the open side port. Its hypersonic explosion would occur any moment now. The instant it went by, he would have to somehow get those two off of that platform. "Dr. Mac," shouted Johnny into the rear of the plane, "get ready. You're about to be a hero." "Oh my goodness," said Dr. McDermott. "Open the side door and throw out 2 lifelines," shouted Johnny. "Make sure our ends are secured to this ship." The old man scrambled about, grabbing at unfamiliar coils and tangles of cables in the rear. "Hey, hold on," said Johnny. He sent the passenger plane plummeting 1,000 feet into the racketing, wind-blasting roar of the chasm. The walls flashed by. Dr. McDermott's stomach stayed 1,000 feet up. The nearby white and red blur of the canyon walls streaked past the open door. and he stared at it, open-mouthed, barely able to hold on. Johnny cracked open the plane's radio. "Durnadine!" he yelled into the mic. "Stand by to abandon that thing!" There was a crack of the sonic boom. The recon drone had passed. Durnadine's fur-hooded face was looking up, and Johnny realized it was not for the passenger plane, but for the benefit of the drone. So Turo supposed it was Johnny down there. Smoke was rising from the platform motor housing, blue smoke, different from the geysers of spray. The ice-pressurized river was taking a full advantage of the hole and made to geyser its way to freedom. Andrew was pounding on the encrusted winch with a sledge. Then he dropped the sledge and seized a bottle of burning gas and tried to open the controls in order to burn the cable in two. The bottle was thick with ice and would not open. The passenger plane came down to 25 feet from the top of the platform, Johnny madly punching control buttons to hold it there. Smoke from the burning motors of the platform swirled chokingly into the plane above. "Dr. Mac!" shouted Johnny. "Throw out those lifelines!" The old man fumbled with the coils. He could not tell one cable from the other. Then he found an end. He pitched it out the door. Scrambling, he let about 50 feet uncoil, and then fastened a cable to a clamp in the plane as best he could. Johnny manoeuvred the cable end over the spray-battered platform. "I cannot find the cable end," wailed Johnny McDermott. Johnny shouted into the mic, "Grab that rope!" "You, Andrew," said Durnadine. 20 feet of cable from the plane coiled down onto the platform and was promptly covered with spray that instantly turned to ice. Andrew took a firm hold of the cable around his arm. "Don't put it around your arm," shouted Johnny. If Durnadine were below him, then the tightening the rope would break to sever Andrew's arm. "Put it around that sledgehammer." Tongues of flame were coming from the motor housing of the platform. Andrew managed to break the sledge loose from the ice. It took 2 turns of a cable around the head of it. "Grab hold!" yelled Johnny. Andrew grabbed the slippery sledge handle with his mittened hands. Johnny jumped and the passenger plane rose up 20 feet, putting Andrew up, leaving the end of the cable dangling over Durnadine. "The captain abandoned ship," says Durnadine. He grabbed the cable end. Johnny put the passenger plane up slowly. It would not do to whip-snap the 2 men off into the rolling river to be swept under the ice. Andrew was hanging to the sledge 20 feet below the passenger plane. Durnadine was dangling 40 feet below on the same rope. "I think the clamp is slipping," wailed Dr. McDermott in the back. The ice mittens of the men were below. Well, they were certainly starting to slip now. It was impossible to raise them up to 1,000 feet to the gorge. Johnny looked wildly at the river. The flying platform below them exploded in a violence of orange flame. The passenger plane bucked in the concussion. Johnny looked down at the men. The flames had hit Durnadine. His leggings were on fire. Johnny swept the plane downriver. Frantically racing fingers, he brought it to 45 feet above the snow-covered ice of the stream. Was the ice thick enough? He dipped the plane. Durnadine struck the deep snow. Johnny dragged him 100 feet through the drifts on the river to put out the fire. He saw a shelf beside the river, narrow and snow-covered. Bringing the plane to within feet of the canyon wall, he lowered Durnadine onto it, then dropped lower. Andrew's gloves, which had been slipping down the sledge handle inch by inch, let go, and he fell the last 10 feet. He was almost off the ledge. Durnadine grabbed him. Johnny, battling the wind, turned the plane around and brought the open door to the ledge. The 2 men scrambled in, helped by Dr. McDermott. Andrew reeled in the cable and got the door slide shut. Johnny vaulted the plane 2,000 feet up and manoeuvred it to land the pad at the top. Dr. McDermott was stammering, with apologies to the 2 men. "I couldn't find a second rope." "Think nothing of us," said Durnadine. "I even got a sleigh right out of it." Dr. McDermott was clucking over the charred leggings, terribly relieved to find Durnadine was just singed and not badly burned. "I had my chance to be a hero," said Dr. McDermott, "and I muffed it." "You did just fine," said Andrew. "Just fine." Johnny got out of the plane and walked over to the canyon edge. They followed him. The shift crew was also staring down, their faces shiny from the perspiration and strain. It had been a wild thing to watch. Shaking his head, Johnny looked down 1,000 feet to where the edge of the staircase was embedded within the bank. The flying platform had vanished beneath the ice. The snow around the place was pockmarked with broken bits and blackened from the explosion. Johnny faced Durnadine and the crew. "That," said Johnny, "is that." The shift boss and Durnadine said almost in chorus, But we cannot quit! No more of these acrobatics in thin air, says Johnny. No more hanging over this edge with our hearts in our throats and our bollocks out of our kilts. Come with me. They followed him back to the pad. He pointed straight down. Below us, said Johnny. That vein is extending into the cliff. It's a pocket vein. Pockets of gold probably occur every few hundred feet. We're going to put a shaft down in that vein. Giggle. Then we're going to drift along that vein underground to the cliff edge and try to recover that gold from behind. Hey. They were silent. But that fissure out there, we can't blast. It would knock the face off the cliff. We're just going to have to use drills. Point drills to go in with parallel holes. Hey. Then vibrating spades to literally cut the rock. It will take time. We can work hard and maybe get there. That's what my ex used to say. Underground, it dawned on them it was a great idea. The shift boss and Donaldine started making plans to fly in drilling machinery and scrapers and bucket conveyors. Waves of relief began to spread. The shift change crew flew in, and when they heard about it, they cheered. And then they all hated hanging from their heels over the giddy space with little return to show. Get it set up and rolling before the next passover of the drone. Turl's gone crazy, but he's still a miner. He'll see what we're doing and hold off. It's like taking rock out with teaspoons, so we'll work this all 3 shifts all around the clock. It'll be easier to work underground in this weather anyway, so we use the dig out to enlarge that flat space. Now where's the transit so we can get the exact direction down over for that dig? The sound of the plane revved up. Donaldine was going back for pilots and equipment. We might make it yet, thought Johnny. Maybe. Who knows? I don't. A worried Zit watched Turl and a swarm of mechanics walking over the old bomber drone. Bomber drone? Oh, bomber drone. The huge underground garages and hangars resounded with the whine of drills and the clang of hammers. Since the last semi-annual personnel intake, Zit had gotten his mechanics back. Aside from exchanging recon drones for refueling every 3 days, a drone he considered useless, his work was not backlogged. Turl had left the transport chief and section alone for now. Turl himself had serviced the 20 battle planes in the outside field. So aside from this present unexpected project, Zit had little about which to complain. But this is idiocy. The bomber drone? He's got to say something. He's got to say something to Turl. Turl was in a huge plane's control room, working with presets of buttons. He was covered with grease and sweat. He had a small remote keyboard in his hand, and he was punching settings into the main panels of the ship. Scotland, Sweden, Turl was saying, and consulting his tables and his notes, and pushing... Where the button not work? And pushing the ship buttons. There were no seats in the place where it should have been, and Turl was hunched uncomfortably on a balanced moating housing. Russia, Alps, China, Italy. No Alps, India, China, Italy, Africa. Turl? Shut up! Amazon, Andes, Mexico, Rocky Mountains 1, 2, 3. Turl, this bomber drone hasn't been flown in 1,000 years. It's a wreck. We're rebuilding it, aren't we? Snarled Turl, finishing his presets and standing up. Turl, maybe you don't know, but this was actually the original Conquest drone. It was the one that gassed this entire planet before the takeover. Well, I'm loading it with gas canisters, ain't I? But Turl, we've already conquered this planet 1,000 or more years ago. You really kill gas now, even in just a few places, and it might hit our own mine sites. They use breathe gas, snapped Turl. Shoulder and bicep, he walked back into the huge plane. Workmen were trundling up big gas canisters from deep underground storage. They had to burn them gingerly to get the crud off the edges. Turl energetically directed the workers, hooking them in place. 15 canisters. You've only brought 14. Get another canister. Some workmen rushed off and Turl was hooking up wires to the canister release valves, muttering to himself, checking color coding and so. Turl, they only kept this drone as a curiosity piece. These things are dangerous. It's one thing to remote guide a recon drone with small motors. They don't override the controls. But this thing has motors like a dozen ore freighters. The signals it sends back to a remote gets overridden by its own motors. If they charge around and release gas any place, it could kill everyone. They could kill everyone. They're too erratic for competent use. And once you start them, you can't stop them. It's like a transshipment firing. They're irreversible. Shut up! And it's the regulations. It says these things only get used in most extreme emergency. There is no emergency, Turl. Shut! He was carrying on, wire matching. You've ordered it to permanently parked in front of the automatic firing bay. We need that for servicing ore freighters. This is a war drone, and they only use them for primary attack on the planet and never use them afterwards, except in the withdrawal. There is no war, and we're not withdrawing. Not from this planet. Turl had had enough. He threw down his notes and loomed over Zit. I am the best judge of these things. Where there is no war department on a planet, the security chief has that post. My orders are final. This drone gets parked at the hangar firing door, and don't you move it. As to control, he took the one small foot-square box in front of Zit's face. All it needs is the date setting and the fire buttons pushed in, and there's nothing erratic after that. This drone will go and do what it's supposed to do, and it stays on standby. Zit backed up. Dollies were moving the huge old relic over to the firing door, where it would be in the way of everything and leave no other door to service freighters. Those are awfully funny locations you're punching in, says Zit. Turl was holding a big wrench. He walked closer to Zit. The man names for planet locations. They're the places where the man animals are left. That little handful? Zit screamed something and threw the wrench in. Zit ducked, and it went clanging across the hangar floor, making workers dodge. You acting kind of insane, Turl? Only alien races ever go insane. Zit stood to one side as they dollied the ancient drone to the firing door. It's gonna stay right there, says Turl, shouting it to nobody in particular. It'll get fired any time in the next 4 months, and for sure on day 93. With a vile smile, he grinned to himself. Zit wondered for a moment whether he ought to shoot Turl when they were in some quiet place. Turl had restored weapons to the employees, refilled the weapons racks in compound halls, even let them wear belt guns again. Then he remembered that Turl had an envelope parked somewhere, printed in case of death. Later, Zit mentioned it privately to Nymph. Zit liked to hunt, and the bomber drone would wipe out most of their game again. Nymph had also liked to hunt once upon a time, but Nymph just sat there and looked woodenly at him. The bomber drone, the one originally shipped in to gas and conquer the planet, remained standing at the firing door, in everybody's way, filled with lethal gas, preset, just requiring a few punches of the remote Turl kept on his own possession. Zit shuddered every time he passed it. Turl had obviously gone stark raving mad. That night in his quarters, Turl did feel a little bit spinny. Another day, and he had gotten absolutely no clue as to what Jade was up to, what the agent was looking for. Turl followed the recon drone photos. The animals were burrowing underground now, which was, that was smart. They might possibly make it. And if they did, if he didn't, he's got his answer for that with the drone. He looked in on the females every evening, throwing wood and meat at them. Sometimes he found packages outside the cage door. He chose not to think about how they got there. He threw those in too. He'd fixed the water, but made sure that it overflowed. The bigger one was sitting up again. He never saw them without being nagged by the puzzle of psychic powers. He wondered which one of them sent out the impulses and whether maybe he could read them on a scope. Well, As long as the animals up in the mountains worked, he'd keep these females alive. It was good leverage. But on day 93, he could not count on the animals not talking. So he could not count on the company or government not catching up with him. The animals, they had to go. And this time, all of the animals. Terrell fell asleep, floundering around in a half-conceived possibility. Jade was denying him gold. It was Jade's fault, but how did one commit the perfect murder of a top agent of the IBI? It made one's head spin to try to work it out. Meantime, he would be the model of efficiency. He had to look like the greatest, most cautious and alert security chief the company had ever known. Was he crazy? Really? No, just clever. Johnny was going home. In a canyon above the village meadow, they unloaded 4 horses and a pack from the freight plane. The breath of the horses hung around them in small, thin puffs. The horses, very recently wild, had not liked the ride and stamped about and snorted when the blindfolds were removed. The air from the clear and frosty at this altitude. Snow was, well, the recent storm covered the world with white and silenced it. Angus and McTavish and Parson McGiverley were with Johnny. A pilot had come along so the plane could be moved in case the visit lasted longer than a day. The recon drone had already gone by, and they took off from the base, and the plane should not be there when it passed again. A week ago, Johnny had awakened on the night with a sudden realization that he might know where some uranium was, his own village. He had no great hope for it, but the signs were there in the illness of his people. Possibly there was no great amount, but also possibly there was more than that single rock from Uravan. He felt a trifle guilty for having to use an ulterior motive to go home. For there were other reasons. His people should be moved, both because of their continuous exposure to radiation, and also because they should not be exposed to any future bombing. Johnny and his men had scoured the mountains for another possible home, and only yesterday they had found one. It was an old mining town on the western slope, lower in altitude, open enough to a narrow pass, open to a western plain. A brook ran down the street of the town centre. Many of the buildings and houses still retained glass. Wild cattle and game were plentiful, but even better, there was a large, half-mile-long tunnel behind the town that could serve as a refuge. A coal deposit was on the hill nearby. The place was beautiful. It had no trace of uranium in it. Johnny did not think the people of the village would move. He had tried before as a youth, and even his father had thought he was just being restless. But he had to try again. Angus and the parson had insisted on coming with him. He had explained the dangers of exposure to radiation to them, and had not wanted them to be put at risk. But Angus had simply waved the breathe gas bottle and promised to check it out ahead of them, and would not be foolish about it. And the parson, being a wise and experienced member of the clergy, knew Johnny might need some help. They knew better than to simply fly a plane into the meadow. Their people had seen recon drones all of their lives, but a plane close up would terrify them. Part of the night had been spent planning. Angus and the parson had been briefed. There would be no action that might alarm the people, no talk of monsters, no frightening tidings about Chrissy. It would be strange enough to be seen entering from the upper canyon. For the pass on the eastern side of the meadow, and all such passes were now choked with snow. And so they rode, 3 mounted men and a heavily laden pack-horse, down into the meadow. The horses' hoofs made little sound as on the loose snow. The deserted cabins on the outskirts were dilapidated and forlorn. Only a whiff of pungent wood smoke was in the air. Where were the dogs? Johnny drew up. The corral where the horses were kept was empty. Then he listened carefully and heard a stamp in the old barn chest beyond. There was a horse there, possibly more than one. He looked toward the pens where the wild cattle were usually driven in before the first snow. There were not many cattle there, not enough to last through the winter. Angus slid down and, as he had promised, he did test for radiation. There was no reaction directly ahead of them. Where were the dogs? True, they were not used for anything but coming back to the valley, but it was strange. Johnny rode on toward the courthouse below them. Angus made another test ahead of them. There was no reaction. An old hound came out of the ruin and looked at them with half-blind eyes. It came forward cautiously, belly down in the snow. It approached Johnny, sniffing hard, wisps of vapour rising from its nose. Then it began to wag its tail, coming closer, wagging harder and harder until the tail was almost whipping the dog's face as he doubled up on himself with greeting. So happy the hound began to yelp with welcome. 3 or 4 more dogs sounded down the village centre. Johnny dismounted to pat the hound. It was Panther, one of his family's dogs. He walked on, leading the horse. The dog rheumatism, trying to cavort around him. A gaunt-eyed child peered at them from the corner of a building, then ran off, stumbling and falling in the snow. Johnny stopped at the courthouse and looked in. The door was off its hinges and the place was empty and cold. Snow had drifted well into the main room. He came out and surveyed the scene of the quiet, ruined village. He saw smoke coming from the roof of his family's house and walked over to it. He knocked. "Do you want to build a snowman?" There were sounds within, and then the door cracked open. It was his Aunt Ellen's it was his Aunt Ellen. She just stood there, staring through the slit. "Johnny? But you're dead, Johnny!" She opened the door wide and stood there, crying. After a little while, she wiped her eyes with a doeskin apron. "Come in, Johnny. I kept your room. But be careful all your things, there, young man. Come in. The cold is getting into the house." "Is there illness in the village?" said Johnny, thinking of his companions. "Oh, no, nothing unusual. There was a deer seen up on the hills, and the men are all up there training it, 'cause they're horny. There's not too much food, Johnny, not since you went away. I mean, I'm not blaming you for leaving us to fucking die." Then she was crying again. Johnny felt a tug upon his heartstrings. She was growing old before her time. She was gaunt, her face, her bones showing through her skin, showing all too plainly. Johnny brought in Angus and the parson, and they warmed themselves by the fire. Aunt Ellen had never seen a stranger before in her life, and she was a little bit frightened because there were 2 old men wearing miniskirts. But she acknowledged the introductions, and then she busied herself getting them some hot soup made from the boiled bones, and they said it was very good. I quite like boiled bones. It's nice when it's chicken. She stopped flashing, but Angus didn't. Questions, and she asked Johnny, and Johnny was very pleased with them. "Chrissy found you?" "Chrissy is alive. So is Patty. Don't alarm them. Don't alarm them." "I'm so glad. I was so worried. But she would go and ride off. Your horse eventually came back, you know." She started to cry again and then came over and gave Johnny a violent hug. She went off to prepare beds for them, just in case they wanted to spend the night. Why? Johnny went out and found the small child who had spotted them and sent him up the hill to recall the party that had been sent after the deer. It was past 4 when he finally got the town council assembled. He was surprised that it was only old Jimson and Brown and Stafford, cripple. The 3rd member had died recently, and no other had been appointed. Johnny had gotten a fire going in the courthouse and propped the door back up. He introduced Angus and the parson, and the town council acknowledged them a little bit weirdly. Like Aunt Ellen, they had never before seen strangers, but Angus and the parson withdrew inconspicuously to the side. You're not that inconspicuous when you're in the snow in the winter wearing a miniskirt. Johnny made his business known to the town council. Town council. No alarm. He told them he had discovered the valley was unhealthy, and that was why they had so few children and had so many deaths, and that he had originally gone to find a better location, and he had finally done so. The new town was very nice. It had water available in the main street where they could also piss and shit, and less snow and more game and better houses, and even some black rock that burned very well. And it was a very nice place. It was a good plea and it was a good idea, and he presented it very well. Old Jameson was very interested and looked very favourable. He was happy about it. He consulted with Brown Nipple, Criffle, as was correct. Brown Nipple, Criffle, held old grudges against Johnny. Look what had happened. Johnny had gone off, and this had drawn Chrissy and Patty away, probably to their death. And now here was Johnny Goodboy Tyler, turned up a year and a half or more later, with some demand that they move their homes. These were their homes. They had always been safe here, and that was that. Nah. They took a vote. It was a tie. There's only two of them. The town council didn't know what to do, because they're fuckwits. There used to be a village assembly and a town meeting, said Johnny. There hasn't been one in my life, said Brandnipper. Cripple. Yeah, I've heard of those, said Jimson. One was held 30 years ago to change the location of the stock pens. As the council is tied, says Johnny, it should call a town meeting. Brandnipper didn't like it. Criffle. But there was nothing else they could do. By this time, several people had drifted by from curiosity, and Johnny had no trouble sending word out to collect the people into the courthouse. It was 5 and dark when they all came. Johnny had gotten more wood and built up the fire. He knew better than to light a miner's lamp for illumination. When at last he looked at them, sitting on benches and on the floor, faces bathed in the firelight of the smoky room, he felt very bad. They were a beaten people. They were gaunt, some of them ill. The children were too quiet. There were only 28 now. A flaming rage at the silos surged within him. He made himself very calm. He smiled at them, and when he felt more like weeping, Johnny began, with the council's permission, by opening up his pack. There were gifts. He handed out some dried meat, some bundles of for food flavouring, and some very live flints. They would strike long trains of sparks, and people found these all very acceptable, and they thanked him. Then Johnny took out some stainless steel axes. I should have known what they could do with cutting a large piece of firewood with one blow. The people were very impressed. Johnny handed them out as presents. That done, he got out a bundle of stainless steel knives. When he showed how they cut, warning them not to cut their fingers, because you're fuckwits, the women were very excited, and they sloshed everywhere. He handed these around. Finally, he handed them these other objects that contained battery. Finally, he got down to business and told them all about the new town and how easy it would be to move. He didn't tell them they're going to be flying them there, because he knew they'd go batshit. For he knew he would he would sacrifice his credibility. Nobody asked questions when they were invited. Johnny had a foreboding. He took a triangular broken glass from his pouch and showed them that you could see through it. He told them that in the new town, a lot of the windows had this in them. It let in the light and kept the cold out. Not on my fucking ass, it doesn't. He passed the glass around. A little boy cut himself slightly, and the glass was quickly handed back. He told them this valley was making them ill. It had a poison in it that made it difficult to have children. With a pleading look upon his face, he let old Jimson put it to the vote. All those in favour of moving, count. All those in favour of staying, cunts. 3 in favour, 15 against. It wouldn't count the children. Johnny would not let it go. He rose. Please tell me, he demanded of them, why take this decision? An elderly man, Torrance Marshall, rose, looked around to see whether it was all right, and then he spoke. This is our own. We are safe here. We thank you for the gifts, and we are glad that you are home. And then he sat down. Brown Limper looked smug. Criffle. The people wandered off quietly to their suppers. Johnny sat down. He held his head in his hands, defeated. He felt the parson's hand upon his shoulder. 'Tis seldom, said the parson, that a man is a king in his own country. That's because you're always invading some fucker else's. It's not that, said Johnny. It's just... Over and over in his head went the words, my poor people. Oh, my poor people. Later that night, he went up to the knoll where the cemetery had been. He searched through the snow until he found the cross of his father's grave. It had fallen over. He put it back in place and scratched the name on it. For a long, cold time he stood looking down at the slight mound, and then he looked at his father's grave. His father had seen no sense in moving the village. Were all his people going to die here? The bitter wind moaned down from high peak. Wake up, Johnny! It flashed! Johnny pried himself awake. It was still dark. Though dawn was late in this season of the year, it was disorientating to find himself in his own room with Angus shaking him and a miner's light burning upon the table. Suddenly he grasped the import of what Angus was saying and got up and began to get to his buckskins. Angus had awakened very early and had been thirsty, and Aunt Ellen heard him clattering around with the buckets. There had been no water, and Angus didn't like eating snow. Not the yellow stuff anyway. So Aunt Ellen had said she would go and get some water. But Angus said, No. Here, go and get the water. If she showed him where it was, and she pointed out the spring, where everybody got their water on the edge of the village. And he took a little hide bucket and he went. Because he promised Johnny not to go anywhere without testing, he'd taken a vial of breathe gas and the remote control. And he had been tossing the breathe gas bottle 30 feet from him, turning it on and off, and wham! The last time he tossed, it exploded. Hopping about with excitement, Angus was handing Johnny bits of clothing to rush to get him to hurry up and get dressed, you fucking Nazi boy. He pushed Johnny out the door and they walked to the spring at the village edge. Angus stopped him. He triggered the remote. Kaboo! There was a flash and a thud of breathe gas explosion. The parson, awakened by the commotion, joined them. Angus did it again, just for his benefit, not because he's part Irish and loves blowing the fuck out of shit. A sudden chill came over Johnny, and not from the morning cold. He'd forgotten to put on his trousers, and his bollocks were screaming. That flash was right alongside the path where the villagers went 2 or 3 times a day for water, and more as a little boy he had been a mutineer on the subject of what work he would do. He was a man, he had said, illogically, since he had begun this as soon as he could walk, and he would hunt, and he would not sweep floors or bring water, and he never had fetched water from that spring. He had even watered his horses at another spring way up the slope. The chill came from his certainty that he himself was not immune to radiation. He had simply never gone to that spring. By a fluke, he had escaped contamination, all because hive buckets slopped on him. But the villagers, particularly the children and the women and the older people who did draw water, were daily being hit with radiation. He felt a deeper chill for his people. Angus wanted to dash up and dig into the snow. Johnny, aided by the parson, held him back. With no protective shields, we need lead glass, something. But let's mark this out, so it becomes a prohibited zone, and then let's look further. They found by cautious sallies that the radiation from that spot extended with enough force to explode breathe gas about 30 feet in all directions. Angus apparently had hit dead center. They marked the ring with ashes taken from the abandoned cabin hearth, and with the axe Johnny collected some stakes and drove them into the former circle. Johnny took some plaited rope and wound it around the stakes. Jimson, along with some of the others attracted by the explosions, wanted to know what the fuck was going on. Johnny left it to the parson to explain. As he worked, he heard fragments of the parson's explanation, something about spirits, but whatever it was, Jimson shortly began to route people around the spot in a businesslike way. Johnny was sure it would soon become taboo to walk within that circle. It was only a few steps further to avoid it altogether. Dawn was there. They had to work fast to be out of here before midday. There might be other spots. The recon drone passed near here, and lately was overflying around noon. He wanted no pictures of this operation on turtle screens. A circle of rope was nothing. It would look like a stock corral or something of that nature. Tracks were nothing. People and horses and dogs wandered around. But the plane up in the canyon and 3 different guard people, that was something else. While they chewed some breakfast Aunt Ellen had brought them, Johnny looked out across the expansive meadow. What a lot of ground to cover. He made up his mind. It was a risk, but very brief exposures, according to toxicology texts, could be tolerated. He got an air mask and bottles from the gear Angus had brought. He filled his pockets with breathe gas flasks. He got a bucket of ashes and got on one of their horses. I'm going to crisscross that meadow at a dead run, back and forth, on past 30 feet apart, and I'm going to be holding a breathe gas vial in my hand, turned slightly on. Every time it flashes, I'll throw down a handful of ashes, and then I'll hold up my arm. Now, Parson, I want you to stand on that knoll, make a sketch of the valley, and you, Angus, tell him each time I hold up my hand. Got it? They got it. The parson went to the knoll with a pad and a pen, and Angus followed him. The three young men who had voted to want to move, well, they wanted to know what the fuck's going on, and if they could help. Johnny told them yes, they could have fresh horses ready. Johnny looked around. All was ready. The red gold sun made the snow glisten. He made sure his air mask was tight, opened the breathe gas vial, and put a heel to his horse. Only a minute later, the vial in his hand flashed. He threw down the ashes, raised his arm, and sped on at a dead run. Angus's yell floated to him on the still air. The parson was marking it upon his sketch. Back and forth, across the meadow, a flash, handful of ashes. Raised hand, the echo of Angus's yell, and the thud of flying hooves. He took a new horse, opened a new bottle, and was off again. I'm guessing the horse is immune to breathe gas. Oh well. Finishers gazed dully at the scene. Johnny Goodboy had often done strange things. Yes, he was quite a horseman. Everybody knew that. It was a bit of a mystery why he kept lighting a torch every now and then. But old Jimson had said some explanation from the clergyman who had come with Johnny. A real clergyman from some village named Scotland. Apparently all the men wear miniskirts. They hadn't known there was any nearby village. Oh yeah, there had been, man. It was a long time ago. It was a couple of ridges over. Well, in all this snow, one didn't get a chance to get about much. But Johnny Goodboy Tyler, well, he certainly could ride, couldn't he? Look at that snow fly! 2 hours, 4 lathered horses later, and 16 vials of breathe gas, and a very tired Johnny later, they got ready to take their leave. They were a bit pressed for time, too pressed to evaluate the map. They decided to leave the horses as a gift, and would have to walk to the plane, even though they were in a really big rush, apparently. The parson was explaining to Jimson that people must stay well away from those ash marks, and Jimson respectfully said he would see to it, even if Brown Nipper Griffle was sceptical. Aunt Ellen and her crack was looking very frightened. You're leaving again, Johnny. Ah. She was trying to work out how to tell him that he was the only family she had. Would you like to come with me, says Johnny. Well, no, this was my home, Johnny. You should come back. Going to wild places was not in your blood. Obviously. He promised to try and come back. He was sure to get pregnant that way. And then gave her some gifts he had saved until last. A great big stainless steel kettle, and 3 knives and a thorough robe, and sleeves in the robe. She pretended to like that very much, but she was still crying when he turned back at the edge of the upper path and waved. She had a horrible feeling that she would never see him again. It was an intense hum of intent men in the room of the old mining town near the road. Several groups were hard at work. It had amused the Scots very much to take the offices of the Empire Dauntless Mining Corporation. The building had been almost intact, and when cleaned up was an acceptable operations room. Johnny half suspected that somebody had rebuilt the town after the lead lode mine had played out. It was too unlike other towns. He tried to figure out why anyone would reconstruct a town after his ore was gone. But evidence certainly showed somebody had. Next door was a place called the Bucket of Blood Saloon, that the parson had gravely put off limits. It had its glasses and mirrors intact, and paintings of nearly nude dancing girls, and the cupids could dimly be made out. Across the street was an office named Wells Fargo, and another one that was labelled Jail. They all lived in the London Palace Elite Hotel, which had labelled suites named after men who must have been very famous miners. 3 of the old widows queened over a coal-burning galley. Angus had explained it to them. It had running water. Such a luxury! The Empire Dauntless offices contained what must have been working models of the mine. and they had found history pamphlets. In it, they talked about the good old days of the Wild West and a boom camp and bad men. Also curious little leaflets that said tour schedules and had a daily routine and a schedule for a bank hold-up. Just to point out, they have that in Ireland in real life when they're going to rob a bank. They actually post it on the radio so the police don't get involved, the Garda Síochána. Paintings of prospectors and mine discoverers and bad men have been cleaned off and put back on the walls. Robert the Fox and two pilots were studiously going over possible plans to hijack an ore freighter. They had no craft that could possibly fly to Scotland or Europe, for their mine equipment only goes a few hundred miles. They had been going around and around this problem ever since the night the demon had told them about bomber drones. They felt they had a responsibility to alert not only the Scots, but the other peoples that might find traces of. They dared not alert the silos they were up to anything, to intercept in the air, leaving the silos to believe the freighter had gone down over the sea. The only thing they kept coming up with, that was the only plan, to hijack it over the sea and nick it. What are they, black? But to silence a silo pilot radio to board a freighter plane in mid-air were some of the things they couldn't work out. Another group. Two of the leaders were off shift with Thor and Dunedin, and some of the miners were going over mining progress. They had gotten down to the lode and were drifting along inch by inch toward the cliff. The quartz they were taking out was pure and beautiful, because it's white, but it had no gold in it. Johnny had explained to them from references that it was a laird with pockets. Wire gold veins only had pockets of gold every few hundred feet. It was not continuously valuable ore. They were getting tired of mining pure white quartz with no gold to show for, and they were trying to figure out how close they were to the fissure of the cliff. It had widened a tiny amount, and this had them worried. The historian, Dr. McDermott, was off by himself, chair tilted against the wall, reading industriously from things his scout had lately brought in from a collapsed school library in a little mining town. Johnny, Angus, the parson, and the schoolmaster were clustered over the parson's sketch of the valley. The positions of the live radiation points were in a line. At first, Johnny had thought it might be a vein of uraninite, popping to the surface at different intervals, but the points were far too regular. They are roughly 100 feet apart, said Johnny, in a straight line. They were staring at the map, thinking when McDermott came over. "There's something funny I've got here, McTyler," said the historian, shaking the book. "The Chinko guidebook. It was mistaken about the Air Force Academy. They often said things just to please the silos, but they called it the Academy of Primary Defense Base. I know. They wanted it to sound big, like it was the last battle fought on the planet. But there was a primary defense base." And he was shaking the book at Johnny. Johnny looked at it. It was Regulations Regarding and Governing the Evacuation of School Children in the Event of Atomic War. Department of Civil Defense. "Apparently," said the historian, "the children would be kept in school until the town mayor was flown out of the city. No, here it is. And that all orders thereafter shall be issued from the primary defense base." "But we don't know where that is," says Johnny. The old man scuttled back to his pile of books. Yes, we do. He came back with a volume concerning congressional hearings into cost overruns of military budgets. Some shit never changes. The American military has never accounted for all of its spending. It's something like $1 trillion every year they can't account for. Anyhow, McDermott opened the volume to where he had it marked. He read, "Questions by Senator Aldrich. The Secretary of Defense then freely admits that the overrun of $1.6 billion in the construction of the primary defense base here in the Rocky Mountains was incurred without congressional authority. Is that correct, Mr. Secretary?" McDermott showed Johnny and slapped the book shut. So the Chinkos were wrong while they were being right. There was a primary defense base, and it was in the Rocky Mountains. He smiled primarily. Smug bastard! And started back to his chair. Johnny was very still. The doom. The iron doors of the dead troops on the stairs. The doom. Dr. Mac, Johnny said. Come back here. He showed him the sketch. You told us a story once about a line of nuclear mines laid by the Queensland Highlanders from Dumbarton to Falkirk, north of England. The historian nodded. He was looking at the sketch. Did you think there were wrecked remains inside the tanks? No, said Johnny. But look, this line goes exactly across the exit from the past in the lower plains. They're exactly spaced. That's an exact straight line. But with no tanks. They never exploded. Time has just made them fall apart. How'd you guess that? Johnny smiled. It was a little bit hard to speak. He indicated the sketch to cover his surge of emotions. After a moment he said, that path leads up to the western plain of the meadow, and beyond that meadow there is a canyon that goes up into the mountains, and way up that canyon is the primary defense base of the ancient government of man. He filled the rest of the sketch in. Other groups had sensed something was happening. They began to drift over. Johnny felt like crying because he was a bitch. He swallowed hard, just like a proper person did after a blowjob. I wondered where they sent all the uranium they mined. I knew it must be somewhere. The parson touched his arm, not wanting him to run to the future failure with a crash. They would not have left it in the base, laddie. But the base records would tell us where it is. It would have maps, wires of communication. I know we'll crack this there. Angus had been staring at the sketch. Ooh, landmines. Just to point out, Scotland is, at this moment in time, and for the past 60 years, the greatest producer, greatest as in number of produced, landmines in the world, even though they're illegal. That's Scottish people. Anyhow, landmines, and I was just about to burrow in. Rob the Fox was already gathering up those in charge to begin their expedition to the tomb. The tomb. The historian was diving for references that could tell them about perils of entering tombs. Don't fret, laddie, said the parson to Johnny, who was just sitting there staring. Dawning will tell us if it's true.